So I wish I could say who it was who first directed me to this, but unfortunately my old channel is gone and therefore all the comments are gone. But someone at some point, and I want to thank that person, whoever they are, directed me to this book. This is Children and Television by Bob Hodge and David Tripp. This is a book about, it's academic studies from the 1980s, I think, on the way children engage with television. It's an Australian book. And the reason it is relevant to me, because I have not read this all the way through, I am not steeped enough in semiotics and academia, certainly not anymore, and even when I was a student of all this stuff, I still think a lot of this would have been over my head. But the main case study they use is a 1978 animated series called Fangface. Fangface. And I would just like to read you a few excerpts from this book. I hope they don't flag me for copyright. So, the method we developed specified a number of stages of analysis. We started with a single program made for children, a cartoon entitled Fangface, which we analyzed along semiotic lines. What this gave rise to was a rich repertoire of possible meanings and an account of the codes by which these meanings were projected. We did not suppose that all these meanings and codes existed for children, however. On the contrary, these were postulated simply as what would be true for children if they were using our adult forms of code and structures of meaning. So the next stages were crucial to use what we knew or believed about children's forms of thought and experience to provide hypotheses about alternative possible structures of meaning and interpretation. Then to observe children in order to see whether children seem to respond in the ways we would expect from our hypotheses. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because a lot of this is the sort of deep academic content that doesn't really work so well on YouTube. This is not to be breezily listened to. This is to be carefully read over for the most part, for purposes far more serious than we're going for here. Cartoons are a long-standing target for the critics of children's television, and at the same time a firmly entrenched favorite viewing category for younger viewers. Citation I won't read out. It therefore seemed the obvious choice of program on which to begin our analysis. Since we need to test the show on viewers who had not seen it before, we used a 20-minute cartoon entitled Fangface, Heap of Trouble, which had not been released in Western Australia, where we did our research. At this point, if this were a talk, we would show the cartoon, whose characters, plot, and every detail are now deeply graven into the memories of our research team. Mine too. For this book, a summary will have to suffice. The cartoon is one of a series which focuses on the adventures of 4 characters. The central character is Fangface, a werewolf who is the transformation of Sherman Fangsworth, Fangs. An adolescent whose 3 friends are Kim, Biff, and Pugsy. In the episode that we analyze, a monster called the Heap attacks professors and steals scientific equipment. Fangs and his gang go to the last professor in the faculty who has not been attacked by the Heap, Professor Boyd, and attempt to guard him. The Heap, however, abducts the professor in spite of the efforts of the group. Fangs and Pugsy track the Heap to his hideout, a cave in the mountains. They find out that the Heap is really Professor Arnos, another professor in the university who was expelled from the faculty and has discovered a ray which transforms men into monsters. Fangface releases the professor, who is held prisoner there, but the Heap escapes, carrying off his invention. Fangface and Pugsy give chase. The Heap is turned back to Professor Arnos by Kim and Biff using the captured ray, and at the end, Arnos is led off into captivity. Where does a semiotician start? With a text like Fangface. Because many different features of the text lead to the same point, to some extent it does not matter, but since many readers will not be familiar with semiotics, we will proceed from basic principles. Fundamental to all semiotic analysis is the fact that any system of signs, semiotic code, is carried by a material medium which has its own principles of structure. In the case of television, the message is communicated by both visual and oral means. That's oral AU, not like oral sound, not oral. The visual image carries marks in space, both pictures and writing. The soundtrack carries sounds in time, speech, music, sound effects, and in this case, canned laughter. Quick side note, the canned laughter was on the VHS release that I had as a kid, the orange tape that had this episode and 2 others. It is not on it was not part of the original airings. It's not part of the The episodes you can purchase now through iTunes and I think Amazon. It's so much better without the canned laughter. The canned laughter really undercuts the jokes and sometimes talks over them, laughs over them. Each of these is a different code organized according to different principles, carrying potentially different messages. We need to be aware from the start of this multiplicity of codes, and as we shall see, the further subcodes, so that we can guard against too limited a sense of the sheer quantity and complexity of the meaning content of the text. I'm going to skip ahead a bit because we're getting into a lot of stuff about semiotics. And we're not here for semiotics, we're here for Fangface. Turning now to our text, the cartoon Fangface, we find it falls into two main parts. An opening sequence of 50 seconds with the title and credits, plus some background on the Fangface myth, followed by the story proper, lasting just over 19 minutes. The opening sequence itself breaks down into a number of episodes. All these are syntagmatic structures of different scales, some small scale, others larger scale. We can see a sharp distinction then between the two major syntagmatic elements, the opening and the story. The opening lasts 50 seconds. It is highly compressed using rapid small-scale syntagms. Once the series went into regular transmission, as it now has in Western Australia, you lucky bastards, this segment was repeated with every story. We could suspect that, like advertisements, it will become very well known, the most salient memory children have of Fangface. Those lucky children growing up with the whole run of Fangface, and not just 3 episodes over and over again. This two-part structure is a well-established convention for adult as well as children's television series. In fact, the opening gives, in a highly compressed form, the meaning of the series, which is a more general category than the particular show. By show, I believe they mean what we here in North America would call episode. To be followed by the particular instance of the actual program. In the case of Fangface, and this is typical, we are given not simply the background to the character Fangface, plus the essential significance of the myth, we are also shown compressed incidents from other stories in the series. It is interesting to note that just as Levi-Strauss required the semiotician to take a series of myths as the primary unit for analysis of meaning, not an individual story, the makers of Fangface also seem to recognize this point. They present the series, or a transformation of it, as an obligatory introduction to every program. See, Fangface is some deep shit. This is an intellectual show. This isn't just some Saturday morning cartoon. So whatever else we analyze as semioticians, we cannot ignore the opening, only 50 seconds long, but dense with meaning. We will start our analysis with the soundtrack, the dialogue and sound effects during the first 100 shots, since these features are easily presented in written form. Introduction. Every 400 years, a baby werewolf is born into the Fangsworth family, and so when the moon shined on little Sherman Fangsworth, he changed into Fangface! Howls, music in. That music is burned into my brain forever. A werewolf! Only the sun can change him back to normal. And so little Fangs grew up and teamed up with 3 daring teenagers, Kim, Biff, and Pugsy. And together they find danger, excitement, and adventure. Music and sound effects continue. Who can save the day? Who can run the race and right the wrongs? None other than Fangface! They clearly misheard it. It's who can wrong the rights and right the wrongs. The verbal language here accompanies a visual text which is much richer in that there are many more images than words. But the verbal language affects the interpretation of the accompanying visual text. One important thing it does is to assign names. These label some images and ought to make them easier to recall and use in verbal language, giving them salience and imposing specific interpretations on them. Bart, in 1977, calls this function anchorage, by which he refers to them the function of verbal language in limiting and tying down the ambiguity and multiple meanings of visual signs. This is Roland Barthes, much discussed on the internet these days for his theory of death of the author, which is, I would say, of all the cultural studies, literary interpretation theories, probably one of the ones that is best known and has best entered the public consciousness outside of academia. Verbal language also communicates abstract concepts such as 400 years, the Fangsworth family, which are not present in the visual images. Words can convey concepts like time and causality more directly than pictures, but if we look closely at the words of this text, we find some interesting illogicalities. The verbal text falls into three segments. In the first, we have the account of the werewolf background. Knowing what werewolves are in myth, we might be surprised at, and so little fangs, in the second paragraph. So suggests causality. But what is the causal connection between being a werewolf and growing up and having adventures with three daring teenagers? Clearly, the word so here is an example of pseudo-causality. However, this fact only becomes obvious if we have the text written out, as here. The written form is a continuous synchronic syntagm. Although these images themselves are synchronic syntagms, they separate the... I'm going to skip ahead for a bit, because this isn't about Fangface anymore, it's about defining what syntagms are. The soundtrack, of course, does not exist alone. We also need to analyze the visual dimension of the show. As semioticians, we need methods for reading such texts. We will start by giving a shot list of the first sequence. 1. Lightning. 2. Fangface. Title. 3. Cut. Fangface wearing red hat. Licks lips and smiles. Freeze. 4. Lightning. High angle shot of house. 5. Zoom in on house. 6. Zoom in on baby in nappy in bassinet. 7. Clouds pass over moon. Zoom out to reveal baby at window. Spins rapidly, turns into werewolf in nappy. 8. Zoom out from picture of sun on packet of soap powder to Fangface turning back into baby. 9. Dissolve. Back to teenage boy. The translation into words does not explain the meanings of this stretch of film. On the contrary, the film is a key to the meaning of the words. To get at the structure of these images, the only method is to take a syntagmatic structure and see what paradigmatic categories constitute it. Paradigmatic structures, the options of possible elements, are often represented as binary oppositions, pairs of opposites, such as man-woman, old-young. When these options are laid out, one can see how they move from very basic and general choices to highly complex and specific ones. There's a little flow chart that you can see here showing character, male, female, older, younger, Biff, Pugs, Kim, three daring teenagers. Three daring teenagers. I don't know how well that's... There we go. That looks better. I think the guys who wrote this weren't sure how to spell Pugsy's name, and I mean, it never appears in print over the course of the show, so we're all using guesswork. They spell it P-U-G-S-I-E. I have usually seen it P-U-G-G-S-Y, which looks better to me, but I don't know, maybe they have different transliteration assumptions in Australia than we do over here in Canada. Sex, age, and character, for instance, provide the choices shown in Figure 2, which is the figure I just showed you. To illustrate, we will take shots 1 to 3. The word Fangface has before it a flash of lightning, and after it a picture of an animal with a single prominent tooth, protruding, wearing a red hat with the peak turned around to the back. If Fangface's hat turned out to be a MAGA hat, it would just break my heart. No, that wouldn't happen. The word Fangface has before it a flash of lightning, blah, blah, blah. The obvious reading of the juxtaposition of word and image is that Fangface is the name of the animal. We are, in fact, given in general terms the paradigmatic categories that make up this synchronic syntagm, word or name and image or thing that is named. The picture itself is a syntagm consisting of a face of an animal with a hat. How do we categorize the two elements to make up a meaning? Or what categories are implied by meanings that we assign it? The hat looks odd on Fangface's head. To express the oddness, we can point to the animal nature of Fangface and the human cultural quality of a hat. His hat is very much a Donkey Kong's tie kind of situation. He's nude except for a hat. It's odd. The baby werewolf wearing a nappy looks odd too, and for the same reason. In the paradigmatic dimension, the options are a pair of categories, nature, culture, or animal-human, which is a more specific instance of the broader pair, which is the source of the image's meaning. We can translate this meaning into words. Fangface is both animal and human, representatives of both nature and culture. This meaning, of course, also underlies the concept of a werewolf. Fangface's hat is odd in another way: it faces backwards. Here, one paradigmatic set of categories concerns the position of a hat. This pair, backwards-forwards, constitutes a single structure. Forwards signals, among other things, conformity, normality. Backwards, therefore, signals the opposite: abnormality, non-conformity. Oh, I remember when I was a kid, wearing your baseball cap on backwards was the coolest thing you could possibly do. I experimented with wearing it sideways, but it wasn't that cool. Again, it is important to stress that as decoders, we do not simply work from categories such as backwards-forwards to deduce the meaning. We simultaneously register a meaning and discover the paradigmatic categories which are the basis of that meaning for us. Nor is that meaning a necessary and invariable one. It applies only for those it exists for, those persons who assign those paradigmatic categories to that syntagm. There might, for instance, be a culture in which hats are always worn with the peak backwards. That would give an exactly opposite reading to the one we have just given. Nor is our reading exhaustive. We have not considered Fangface's single tooth, which is big, signifying old, powerful, yet single, non-powerful, and perhaps young, reminiscent of the first of the adult teeth, which come at about 6 years old. Nor have we considered that the hat is red, which forms a significant contrast with other primary colors like blue and non-primary colors like brown. Fangface's design is rich in meaning, y'all. As these examples show, it is doubtful whether there can ever be such a thing as an exhaustive semiotic analysis, not only because there is so much to analyze, but because a complete analysis would still be partial, because it would still be located in particular social and historical circumstances. Nevertheless, a real, if provisional, understanding of the kind of structures used to encode meaning is gained from such an analysis, and it is essential as the basis of hypotheses about children's interpretation of the messages. Going to skip ahead again a little bit. If we consider this set of shots, we see one factor which could help a decoder. The title and images of Fangface are repeated frequently during the cartoon, and the viewer has many opportunities to see all the features we have analyzed. They are Fangface, his defining qualities. Every repetition of the message is technically surplus, a redundancy, but redundancy is highly functional in communication. It ensures that the message does get across, and it can emphasize some parts of the message as especially important. Paradoxically, however, massive redundancy can also mask a message from consciousness. Like breathing or the ground beneath our feet, information is taken for granted, or is not talked about or reflected on, unless suddenly it is difficult or it is no longer there. Redundancy is not confined to systematic aspects of particular messages that recur. There is also redundancy of paradigmatic structures. To show how this works, we'll continue our analysis of the first 9 shots. The sequence 456 goes from lightning to the house scene from the outside to a zoom on the baby inside the house in a bassinet. The sequence is clearly organized by a movement from outside to inside, from nature as a dangerous, threatening force, to culture, the house and the bassinet, and the baby protected within by both. In shot 7, the movement is repeated, starting with a shot of the moon, outside nature, then showing the baby at the window, not threatened by nature. The baby then spins rapidly like a whirlwind, nature, or like a machine, culture, and turns into a baby werewolf, nature. However, this werewolf is not a threatening figure. It has a cute expression and wears a nappy, human, culture. Then, with a soundtrack saying, "Only the sun," nature, "can change him back to normal," we see a picture of the sun with alongside it the words, "Sunshine Laundry," culture. A zoom out reveals that this picture of the sun is on a packet of soap powder in a kitchen. The sun then controls Fangface, then is not the natural sun, but a commercial appropriation of the sun tamed for domestic purposes. In the cartoon that follows, Fangface's metamorphoses are always triggered by photographs or pictures of sun and moon, either seen accidentally by him in a kitchen or other domestic space, but more often shown to him by one of the 3 daring teenagers who thus control him. Yeah, over the course of the series, occasionally it is the real sun or moon, but more often it is just simulacra, or not even always deliberate simulacra, sometimes completely unintentional ones, like in The Great Ape Escape, he sees a bonfire that from a certain angle looks like the sun, and that's considered enough. The pattern throughout the sequence is built up of different arrangements of primary oppositions, nature, culture, human, animal. The result is not a single consistent message about the relations between the two. Sometimes nature is seen as threatening, sometimes as compatible with culture. Fangface is the focus of both ambiguity and ambivalence. He is both animal and human. Not only does he wear the red hat and, as an infant, a nappy, but he can also stand upright, and his body is ambiguously both human and animal. He shares this ambiguity with other cartoon animals who typically occupy an indeterminate space between human and animal. Fangface speaks, human, but also howls, animal. He is ambiguous in age. His voice is normally deep, adult, but he has a childlike obsession with food and a single tooth, baby. His relative size also changes. Sometimes he's larger than the teenagers, and at other times he seems no bigger than a largish dog. In terms of other qualities, though, Fangface is basically presented as a force for good. Who can save the day? Because they missed the line about wrong the rights and right the wrongs, though, there's another layer of ambiguity that isn't really picked up on here. But I think it does further go to strengthen their argument. The forces he represents, lightning, wolves, darkness, and destructiveness, the forces of the night, are presented as safely tamed and controlled, but nevertheless, those are still the forces he contains. If goodness needs a Fangface to right the wrongs, then goodness, the sun, light, culture, is acknowledging a dependence on these primal, potentially amoral, and destructive forces of nature. And this is why it's so appealing when you're a kid, this kind of thing. The amoral, destructive forces presented in a positive and celebratory light instead of something that needs to be tamed. It's an indulgence of everything kids like. At least I liked. Levi-Strauss found that mythic figures typically were ambiguous. Monsters, liminal figures, transgressors. Fangface is that kind of figure. So are other cartoon heroes. Bugs Bunny, a modern descendant of the trickster figure so common in primitive myth. See Levi-Strauss, 1963. Yogi Bear, Tom and Jerry, even the almost human Mickey Mouse. The rest of the opening sequence introduces the main cast list, who are shown in typical adventure. In the first shot, they are shown climbing a stairway in a cellar at night. Fangs, in human form, goes up first, followed by Pugsy, then Kim with Biff in the rear. Fangs and Pugsy form a pair. They are distinguished from the other two by clothing. More scruffy, informal clothes, indicative of lower social status, and voice, lower-class accents. I don't think that the writers of this picked up on the fact that Fangs and Pugsy are overtly modeled on, respectively, on Hunts Hall and Leo Gorcey, a pair of American comedians who were big in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I guess they didn't get much play in Australia, but I don't know how evident that would have been to a child audience in the late 70s either, but I guess the parents probably would have picked up on it. Kim, the girl, has a darker colored face. It is ambiguous whether she's meant to be black or not, but in every way she is respectably middle class. The four meet a monster covered entirely in bandages at the top of the stair, a mummy, and they run down the stairs in reverse order. Biff, the middle-class male, leading the way. Kim shows Fangs a picture of the moon. His face is shown close-up, differing parts of it going in and out like a machine. Then he whirls and turns into Fangface, who grasps an end of the bandage of the pursuing mummy, which collapses into a heap. The mummy would appear in a later episode, although it does not get unraveled this way. It actually survives the episode, essentially. We then see in quick succession 6 monsters, black, blue, green, yellow, plus 2 others. The blue one is the Heap, the monster of the story we will look at. Another is a large armor-plated female with Egyptian clothing. That's actually an Amazon warrior. I believe it's supposed to be Greek clothing. The final shot sequence shows Pugsy pursued by a monster jumping into a rubbish bin. Fangface, while the voiceover says who can run the race and right the wrongs, presses his foot on the ejection pedal. Pugsy shoots into the air and is caught by Fangface in 2 huge slices of bread. Fangface opens his mouth as though to eat Pugsy, then converts the action into a kiss, then smiles towards the audience. So this is all great examples of the ambivalence that we're talking about here that is inherent to the idea of a heroic werewolf. He's about to eat Pugsy, and then he remembers, ooh, Pugsy's my friend, and he does not eat him. He is the monster for good, as opposed to one of the monsters for evil. He wrongs the rights and rights the wrongs. This brief summary gives us the outlines of what is an authoritative transformation of the series. Authoritative in the sense that it is done by the makers of it. First, the plot structure reduces to 3 elemental moments. Humans seek monster, monster chases humans, good monster, Fangface, defeats bad monster. In this summary, it is clear that a bad monster is as indispensable as the good one, even though it will be a different bad monster each new story. The opposition human-monster then is primary for the series. It generates not only Fangface, who is both, but also his opponent. The cast list has a significant structure. As we've seen, Kim and Biff go together, and so do Pugsy and Fang, signifying middle class and working class respectively. The elemental social world of the cartoon has the paradigmatic structure found shown in figure 3. So here is figure 3. Middle class, male, Biff, female, Kim. Working class, dominant, Pugsy, subordinate, Fangs. So, the working class are represented as without females. However, the relationship between the middle class Kim and Biff is cool and proper. Kim has more interaction with Fangs, whom she keeps turning into a monster, than with Biff. There's a general interpretation among viewers that Kim and Biff are supposed to be dating. I dimly recall in one episode you see them briefly holding hands, but I cannot remember which episode that is, and it might have been something I imagined. And if it is there, it's all that's there. Pugsy and Fangs interact more intensely, if more aggressively, and they have appetites. Fangs often eats, and Fangface is dominated by his desire for food. There is also the quick last shot in the opening sequence of Fangface kissing Pugsy, a very discreet hint of a homosexual relationship with the macho Pugsy. I don't take it that way, but you could. The underlying structures determining the main characters can be seen in the cast of the story that follows. The middle class, Kim and Biff, have as their transformational equivalents the good Professor Boyd and his daughter Sally. There is also a group of 3 scientists shown, 2 males and 1 female, plus a couple in a restaurant. The leading scientist has a face which seems colored like Kim's, and the lady in the restaurant, likewise. Such repetition confirms the analysis. The other main character is Professor Arnos in his alter ego, the Heap. This human monster is recognizably a transformation of Fangface Fangs, but whereas Fangs is low in the social hierarchy, Arnos comes from near the top, a professor, even though he's been sacked. The world of the cartoon as a whole, then, can be seen to be derived from a simple set of elements by a small number of transformations. The principles plus the transformations are a kind of formula for the series. Levi-Strauss saw a formula of this kind grasped as a generative principle as what he called understanding the myth. Understanding in this sense would mean that someone could predict plot developments or appreciate the ingenuity and significance of novel but valid twists of characterization or plot. However, understanding can take us wider afield than the Fangface series. Fangface has structural similarities with Scooby-Doo, a popular cartoon dog, which also goes on adventures with 3 daring teenagers, and which likewise has humanoid qualities, although Scooby goes with 3 daring teenagers and 1 cowardly teenager, I will point out. People sometimes look at group shots of the Scooby-Doo of the Fangface cast and assume that they are all, that Fangs is a stand-in for Shaggy and that Fangface is a stand-in for Scooby-Doo, and miss the fact that Fangs and Fangface are actually the same character. Kind of. Scooby does not metamorphose and does not have superpowers, but the similarities are close enough for us to see Fangface as a partial transform of Scooby. The Heap is similarly a recognizable transform of another popular character, the Incredible Hulk, who metamorphoses from the scientist David Banner. Yeah, I know his name is Bruce now. It was David in the 70s. Don't worry about it. Only the color, blue, not green, and the valuation, bad, not good, are different. Fangface, given his transformational relationship to the Heap, is also a transform of the Hulk. His derivation from the werewolf myth is made explicit. His name and his 1 prominent tooth probably invoke the vampire myth, and his obsession with eating is a transform of the vampire's obsession with sucking. Though again, there is a transformation from bad to good. Vampires suck, people eat. If Fangface were a literary text, some schools of criticism would see this set of connections as an example of intertextual meaning, an enrichment of the meaning of a specific text by its interaction with, including its contestation of, meanings of other texts, even as a whole tradition. Another school of literary criticism would talk of influences, stressing ways in which the author of this particular text was affected by other works, and was to that degree unoriginal, even if it's works that are also from the same authors. Both these kinds of judgment are as appropriate to this text as to a form of high literature, even though Fangface is only that despised form, a modern cartoon for children. What a semiotic analysis adds to the purely literary approaches is a recognition of the status and structures of the meaning at issue. Any one of these characters carries a rich set of meanings which are bundles of paradigmatic oppositions, representing categories which are basic to a cultural logic, thus giving them their continuous appeal. Going to skip ahead a little bit. Our analysis so far has barely touched the meanings of the particular story, Heap of Trouble. We have suggested that the meaning of a cartoon like this are very rich, highly polysemic. Polysemy is when a number of different meanings coexist in a single signifier, but also highly redundant. We will illustrate these qualities in the first episode of Heap of Trouble. By episode, he means scene or sequence. We will start again with the soundtrack at the point when Professor Boyd is about to demonstrate his new invention, a very complex-looking machine. Okay, he's wrong about this. That's not Professor Boyd. This is a different character who only appears in one scene. Scary music in with low breathing. After 4 months of work, my invention's finally perfected. You're all going to have the honor of being the first to witness panting, growls, howls, screams. Stay away, get back! Climactic music discordant. Again, we can see that the plot is barely carried by the dialogue. This time, we have no voiceover giving narrative information. The verbal language is precise, 4 months, my invention, but seemingly irrelevant. The soundtrack carries 3 distinct main codes which form a significant structure. Music, speech, and animal sounds. Speech is opposed to howls as culture is to nature, human to animal. Music is between the two. It is a product of culture, yet also allied with the emotional, the physical, the animal side of man. Unsurprisingly, the professor speaks human language, and the monster merely breathes heavily and growls. But significantly, the scientist, when confronted by the heap, breaks off this verbal discourse and screams, thus returning to a more primitive nature. Part of Professor Arno's evil plan, will be told, was to turn the whole faculty into hulking monsters! Causing professors to break down into a scream achieves that as much as smashing complex machines, though in a different way. This is smart. This is a good interpretation, actually, of what's going on in the layers. I want to be clear, this is not me being like, haha, you're overthinking a children's cartoon. I swear to you, I will never be that guy. I think this is actually a really interesting, and I'm not kidding here, a really interesting and nuanced reading. Again, it is the shot list that carries more information. Here's the opening sequence. Shot 31, pan around buildings. Nighttime clock shows nearly midnight. Zoom into sign. 32, State University sign on wall. Blue hands grab top of wall. 33, ground on other side of wall. Blue feet land, walk on. 34, pan with feet to sign science building. 35, back view of man at window. Naked muscular back, long blue hair, trousers with ragged bottoms. 36, interior of lab, 3 scientists inside in white coats. 37, leading scientist at machine, turns. 38, the heap, bursts through door. 39, close-up, heap's face, menaces. 40, close-up, leading scientist, scared. 41, heap walks to machine, picks it up. 42, heap with machine above head, walks out. The first shot is a pan from above and outside a building at night, just as in the opening credits. The sweep of the camera picks up the sequence of buildings in neoclassical style and grounds an alteration of high culture and cultivated nature. The basic color tonality is blue, the same color as the heap and the inventions, which we will see in the laboratory. So blue establishes an equivalence between the heap, night, and machines, both nature and technology, evil and good. The camera picks up a clock which redundantly shows that the time is after midnight, a somewhat strange time for the professor to demonstrate his new invention, but one which links technology, including even the machines of good professors, to the forces of evil, the witching hour, and darkness. But the addition of the clock does have a further significance. It is a cultural object, a machine confirming the message communicated by the coloring, that it really is the time of darkness, evil, and nature. The opposition, nature-culture, is repeated in a strong form with 2 sequences. First, a yellow sign, State University, with the blue hands grabbing the top of the wall. Then a pan from bare blue feet with muscular legs and a glimpse of ragged trousers, followed by the sign, Science Building. A last comment we will make on this sequence concerns the Heap's hair. The first full-length shot of the Heap from the back shows his dark blue hair going halfway down his back. Long hair is a signifier with a long and complex history. At some points in history, long hair has signified female, short hair male. It has also signified the luxuriance, energy, even the rebelliousness of youth, or nature generally. The figure of Samson is a famous example of the second. Long hair is an ambiguous signifier, and thus ambiguity is a current fact about contemporary Western culture. Discussions about hair length and hair care by parents and by children among themselves, are often heavily laden with significance, and particular instances are explicitly taken as symbols of general, culturally important attitudes. Children, we might expect, will pay close attention to hairy meanings. The Heap's long, unkempt hair contrasts in a number of ways with Professor Arnaus' bald head, ringed by short, smooth gray hair. The hint of sexual ambiguity in the Heap is repeated, incidentally, with some of the monsters in the opening sequence. The bandage monster would be familiarly referred to as a mummy. Another monster was a very masculine Egyptian lady. Again, Amazon. The Amazons in that episode are... do have some conventionally masculine signifiers in that how big and brawny they are, although their femininity is also emphasized in Fangface's strong reactions to them.
That guard may be a lady, but she's big and powerful and mean-looking.
Oh yeah? That's my specialty. Big, powerful, mean-looking Amazon types.
He's into that. A reading like this picks up innumerable small messages. I'm sure the guys who wrote this did not actually watch the Amazon episode. Far as I know, Heap of Trouble is the only episode they watched. This isn't a judgment. This isn't like, oh, you fake fans. So skipping ahead again a little bit, in order to fix the larger structure of Heap of Trouble, we need a description of its ending, the denouement. In the final episode, Fangface and Pugsy pursue the Heap, who is carrying his ray gun. The Heap evades Fangface and chases Pugsy. Fangface grabs the ray gun, and he and Pugsy leap into an elevator. Fangface blindly carries the elevator onto a rocket, which shoots off into space, with the Heap outside the elevator attempting to get at Pugsy and Fangface. The elevator falls off the rocket and lands balanced on the point of a radio tower. As it sways, the Heap falls off, grabbing Pugsy as he goes. Fangface holds onto Pugsy and almost falls out too. He manages to support himself and the other two by his toes, but is slowly losing his grip. Meanwhile, the ray gun has fallen and been caught by Kim in a car driven by Biff that had been tracking the rocket from below. She falls over after catching the gun, but is still able to hand it over to Biff, who turns it on to the Heap. The Heap immediately turns back to the lightweight body of Professor Arnaus, and Fangface is able to pull the three back into the elevator. The final scene has police putting Professor Arnaus into a police van. Professor Boyd and his daughter Sally, with Kim and Biff, stand in a group. Fangface threatens to eat Pugsy, but Kim turns him back into Fangs. The final shot is a long shot from behind the two middle-class couples, standing arm in arm, as Pugsy chases Fangs into the distance, their laughter merging with canned laughter on the soundtrack. Again, canned laughter was only in this one VHS release. It really hurts the episodes. It was a mistake to put it in. This ending falls into two parts, the end of the adventure and the end of the program. Each has its own structure, which we can represent as shown in Figure 5, which I believe is on the next page, and I'll show you that in a second. The principles of this hypertactic structure are essentially the same as the larger structure we saw before. They are homologous in nature and equivalent in content, so that if the largest level of structure is missing, its message might still be seen at other levels. However, there are a number of significant differences. So this is Figure 5. We've got, you see ending, split into denouement, which includes chase, pursuit, Fangface, Pugsy, chase monster, reverse, monster chases Pugsy, Fangface chases Pugsy. Resolution, Biff transforms Heap, Pugsy chases Fangs. That's the denouement, and over here in the conclusion we got chase, resolution, Kim transforms Fangface, reverse, middle class in control. I think this episode is probably a little bit more rich in class-based themes than most of the others, but not, when you've got a couple of Bowery boys in your main cast, that's going to come up here and there. In the rest of the plot, Fangface, usually accompanied by Pugsy, saves the other two, whereas in the denouement, it is the two teenagers who save Fangface by transforming the Heap back to normal. In the conclusion, the only monster left to threaten humanity with his uncontrolled appetites is Fangface, but Kim turns him back to normal too, and viewers are left with an image of that normality in the final tableau. The tableau is a synchronic syntagm, which may be read in at least two different ways. In one, the middle class are a majority, forming a cohesive group, male and female, young and old, harmoniously united in laughter at Fangs and Pugsy. Camera position, plus the canned laughter, invite the audience to take a particular class point of view, from which the representatives of the lower class are seen as ridiculous, self-divided, self-canceling, disappearing from the scene. Heavy. They are too involved in satisfying their immediate appetites to ask for any reward or recognition of their role in capturing the heap and restoring the world to normality, a normality which is dominated by the middle class in every way. Heavy. Also, I want to make a point that in every episode they make a point of not asking for rewards. Sometimes they're offered a reward and specifically turn it down. And they frequently say things like, "Don't thank us."
Thanks for getting Charlie to me safely, kids.
Our pleasure, Dr. Crawford.
Another reading would emphasize the parental, rational, controlled thinking aspect of the group in contrast to the immature childishness of Pugsy and Fangs. So we can see that a number of different meanings are carried by the ending. Not only does crime not pay, being lower class or childish does not pay either. Wow. Nor does being a monster or abnormal in any way, in spite of a brief period when Fangface seemed to be valued and the heap feared. These messages are heavily ideological. They only exist, however, as hypotactic structures, which establish for each viewer able to perceive them a hierarchy by prioritizing particular messages from among the whole set of messages of the cartoon. I'm not actually sure I agree with this. I think Fangface is very much valued for his explicitly monstrous qualities. These are just qualities that need to be controlled and reined in. So it's a show about the times when you need the irrational, and knowing when you want Fangs, when you want Fangface. And now and then they specifically need Fang's help also, but that's a side note. However, if, as we have suggested will be the case for very young children, the hypotactic structures are not perceived, especially those at the highest level, then the story will be interpreted as a paratactic structure, as a relatively unordered string of messages, each of equal validity, especially when you're watching 3 episodes on a cassette and aren't entirely sure where one stops and the next starts. We can say then that anyone who is not oriented towards hypotactic messages will miss most of what some researchers call the pro-social content, such as that crime does not pay. Pro-social was a big thing in 70s and 80s children's entertainment, is just sending out positive messages of, working together, crime does not pay, things like that. And that's why you had shows like the Get Along Gang, if anyone remembers that one, and really aggressively wholesome material. For the viewer oriented to paratactic structures, the story will not exist as a unity. If there is a single meaning that is seen as the meaning of Fangface for the paratactic viewer, it is likely to be a repeated syntagm or a repeated paradigmatic structure, especially a densely coded meaning carried by a repeated synchronic syntagm. Of these, the most pervasive is the central character, in this case Fangface, Fangs. The meaning carried by this complex syntagm are, as we have seen, ambiguous, contradictory, and ambivalent. The non-hypotactic meanings, then, are the site of contradiction, subversion, and contestation. We cannot even postulate an either-or because paratactic meanings are primitive and powerful, accessible as an alternative content even for someone who can interpret hypotactic structures, which children and indeed most adults cannot. I'm not entirely sure myself what hypotactic even means, I'm afraid. What we have with Fangface and with children's programs generally is a double set of possibilities of different meanings. Different types of show could rely on different proportions of the two types of structure, or children of different ages might give different weighting of the two types of structure. Don't feel bad if some of this is going over your head. It's mine too, to be honest. As I say, this sort of thing is not meant to be read breezily like a novel. It's something to read over slowly and carefully, probably with all the reference books on hand, all your Levi-Strauss and your Roland Barthes. The purpose of this chapter has been to introduce some principles of semiotic analysis, applying them to a cartoon in order to demonstrate the enormous complexity of what is often taken to be a very simple and straightforward message structure. An incidental purpose was to familiarize readers with the cartoon, which we used extensively in our imperial work. That sounds like a great job. We have so far only prepared the ground for an exploration of children as television viewers by elucidating some of the messages which are at least potentially perceivable by them. We also foregrounded the diverse kinds of messages that are carried by different forms of structure, drawing out hypothetically what the consequences would be if children are more oriented to one kind of structure rather than another, or if they typically fail to perceive and need certain kinds of structure that are important in an adult reading. However, the questions that really matter concern what actually happens when children watch television. Which of these meanings do they see? How do they organize the meanings they see? How do they make sense of television messages? These are the questions we attempt to address more empirically in subsequent chapters. And I think that's something that I really want to stress here because, like I said earlier, I am not going to be the guy. I'm never going to be the guy who says, you're overthinking this, the curtains were just blue. Meanings can be there without the author's intent, and they can be there without the viewer consciously picking up on them, but they're still there, and you can pick up on something unconsciously. I mentioned that in my previous video about Fangface, that I know now what about the show appealed to me so much, the idea of the monster as hero. I could not have put it into words then, but that was definitely it, and that was what I found so intriguing. And the whole "it's just a cartoon" argument is reductive bullshit, and you could, I want to be clear here, you could apply this level of analysis to just about anything. And I think the reason they chose a children's cartoon, aside from the fact that this is a study about the way children engage with media, but the fact they chose a children's cartoon shows that even something that is created for younger viewers who are not going to be picking apart the symbolism, and something that is not necessarily created with all that much thought and effort, although I would argue that Fangface is a masterpiece, is still going to have a ton of meaning because that's just the nature of a text. Skipping ahead a bit, we come to a child's eye view of Fangface. After these preliminary words of caution, we turn again to Fangface, and our opening question, how much of our analysis is relevant to children? As a start towards an answer, we set up a number of interviews with children in which we showed them the first 5 minutes of the cartoon, then discussed it with them in groups of 5 or 6. The total number of children interviewed was 42. They came from 6 different schools from different socioeconomic areas, though there was no other attempt to ensure a spread of social class. All groups were mixed sex with a total of 23 boys and 19 girls, and all groups were aged between 8 and 9 years except for one group of 11 to 12-year-olds. The interviews were all conducted by the same person, a skilled interviewer and an experienced teacher who was acquainted with semiotic theory. Skipping ahead a little bit. The cartoon immediately mobilized children's acquaintance with the relevant genres. 2 children whispered Scooby-Doo early on while they were watching Fangface. Most groups referred to Scooby-Doo as a relevant program, and all groups compared the Heap to the Incredible Hulk, and many children even got the Heap's name wrong, calling him the Hulk. Easy mistakes. This occurred 8 times in the series of interviews, the largest number of errors we recorded. Thus, it is clear that Levi-Strauss and the producers are right to see not simply the series, but the genre as an important unit of meaning, because children decoding a new example of a cartoon go from the general to the particular, from genre to series to program, following major transformational routes. Again, program refers to what we in North America would call an episode, I believe. Skipping a paragraph. In this experiment, we showed only the first 5 minutes of the cartoon in order to judge how well children could use their understanding to predict how the story would end. Children were all emphatic that good would triumph and that the Heap would be caught. E.g., they catch him, they always do. Other children nod agreement. Most groups believed that the monster would be unmasked, that is, they projected him as a character with a dual identity. Children in 4 different groups guessed that Professor Arnos would turn out to be the Heap, or be responsible in some way, which is impressive because 5 minutes into the episode, I don't think we've met Professor Arnos yet. We've heard him mentioned, And I guess the kids were able to put two and two together that this was relevant.
What about Professor Arnos, Dad?
The heap hasn't bothered him that we know of, but the college let him go long before this monster showed up.
How come they let him go, Professor?
Yeah, how come?
He was doing some unauthorized experiments, but they amounted to nothing.
One boy from the 12-year-old group had this to say very early in the interview. Gordon, I think I've worked out who's the heap, or whoever it is, that man who got discharged from the university or something, most probably he's dressed up or something to just scare the men yeah. Interviewer, did anyone else think that might be something to do with it? General noises of agreement. What about you, Kara? Kara, oh, I just thought I reckon that they'd catch him and then they'd get off his mask and pull it off. They always do. Mabel, yeah, like in Scooby-Doo. They don't. It's not Scooby-Doo. It's not a costume. It's real. I will die on this hill. Equally interesting was one mistaken prediction Gordon made a little later that the good professor would be revealed to be the heap. A mistaken prediction like this, C.F. Smith, 1973, on virtuous errors, reveals the underlying processes more clearly than a correct one. This boy is employing a transformational model which is powerful enough to throw up not only right answers, but also wrong answers of the right kind. Professor transformed to the heap is mind transformed to body, good transformed to bad. He has grasped the principle of metamorphosis, in terms of which the category of professor is destabilized and becomes ambivalent, so that both monsters and professors, good and evil, are seen as different sides of the same coin. He is actively interrogating the text for evidence with which to substantiate his hypothesis. Another of the 12-year-olds, a girl, also suspected the good professor. None of the 9-year-olds made so interesting an error, so this level of transformational understanding may be beyond them. Although they could certainly grasp the substantive metamorphosis from professor to monster, mental to physical power, good to evil. Further evidence of children's ability to grasp the myth was that most groups showed a generative grasp of the cast list. That is, they remembered the structure as well as the individuals. The typical pattern of recall had the heap, then Fangface, as the most salient. In the first 5 minutes, the heap makes a big impression in his opening scene. Everyone listed these two characters, usually first, and most discussion revolved around them. All this is unsurprising. At the other extreme in memorability were Biff, the good teenager, and Sally Boyd, daughter of Professor Boyd, the good professor. No one in any of the groups mentioned Sally. There were 2 errors of recall associated with Biff. 2 boys in different groups got the color of his hair wrong, calling it blonde when it was dark brown. I think they were picturing Freddie Jones. It was, in fact, good Professor Boyd and his daughter Sally who had blonde hair. 2 girls changed Biff's sex, seeing the group of teenagers as made up of 2 girls. We have 2 observations to make about this. One concerns the transformational equivalence of the good characters in the minds of the child viewers, particularly Biff and the Professor, which makes sense. They're both boring authority figures. Second is their apparent unimportance in children's perception of the program. See? With regard to the first point, as has been found elsewhere, Durkin, 1985, the children were articulate in their descriptions of the ideology underpinning these stereotypic characters and how it would be realized in a program. One boy coined the distinction between goodies and goody-goodies. Interviewer, what's the difference between goody-goodies and just plain goodies? Chris, well, the goody-goodies, real good. Loud laughter from whole group. Goody-goodies in this cartoon were then identified as Kim and Biff, and the judgment was made. Alan, the goodies might not solve the problem. The goody-goodies would. Whole group laughs. The laughter here is an important signal. It seems to indicate, first, that the group endorses Chris's and Alan's explication. Second, that there is a subversive force to this comment. There is a simultaneous recognition and resistance of the ideological rules of the cartoon universe. They know that the middle-class pair will be vindicated and in control at the end of the cartoon, but they also doubt, if not actually repudiate, the values represented. There are a number of signals that this is a child utterance. The vocabulary, goody-goody, the laughter, eye gaze, children looking at each other, not at the interviewer as normal, and intonation, a downwards intonation at the end, indicating definiteness or confidence in their meanings. In spite of this laughter, the relevant rules were described in detail by this group. One rule concerns who can drive cars. Alan put the rule as follows. Alan, the main characters do not drive the car, and the not-so-main characters do not do. Ha! Interviewer, who are the main characters? Alan and Mary. Fangface, Pugsy. That's interesting because as the series goes on, Biff is shown to be able to drive pretty much anything, and no one comments on it because who cares about Biff? So these kids are completely spot on in this regard, more so than the interviewers realize. Behind this new distinction between main and not-so-main is the same recognition as with goody-goodies versus goodies, that the characters who are at the center for the child viewer, offered for identification and enjoyment, so Fangface and Pugsy, are excluded from power. On the role of these not-so-main characters, opinions were sometimes mixed. Alan, who asked whether Kim might drive the car, said yes, but Mary disagreed. Others speculated whether Pugsy and Fangs, as the boy, so not Fangface, Fangs, could have driven the car, but the consensus was that they could not. So Biff emerges as the only one who can drive a car with all that signifies about his power in the world. We can postulate from this and other features of the cartoon that there is an underlying categorization whereby Biff and Kim have the status of proto-parents, while Pugsy and Fangs are children. I agree with that. But Biff is not a highly valued character in all respects. Interviewer, the one that was driving, what sort of person was he? Alan, a person that agrees with anyone. Smiles, so do other boys. Chris, kind of a boring person. Smiles, as do the other boys. Yep. The smiles that accompany this comment, this time it is a male consensus, again signals the subversiveness of the comment. This kind of exchange brings out something that our initial analysis did not. The good middle-class characters are effective, but unappealing. And this is the rare episode where they are even effective, because in most episodes they're entirely reliant on Fangface and Pugsy. Mostly Fangface. The main focus of ambivalence, however, was the Heap. Many of the boys identified with him, 8 in all. In discussion, everyone mentioned 2 features, his color, normally contrasted with the Incredible Hulk, and his hair. Every group mentioned that his hair was unusually long. 2 children, 1 boy, 1 girl, in different groups speculated that he might be female. Alan, you couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl because it had its hair way down there. Indicates point low down on his back and laughs. Another boy laughs. And in another interview, interviewer, what else did you think about him? Ray, he had messy hair. Phyllis, I thought he was a girl at first when he, interviewer, did you? Why did you think he was a girl, Phyllis? Phyllis, 'cause he had long hair. In spite of this transient ambiguity, no girls unequivocally volunteered the wish to be the Heap. We can see some of the forces at work from the following exchange. Interviewer, but you girls didn't want to be the Heap, or you didn't want to be Fangface. Christy, I'd like to be Fangface, wouldn't mind being Fangface. 2 boys look at her. Alan, the Heap's not for a girl. The other 2 boys still look at Christy. Christy, but the Heap, well, it'd be okay, but everybody would be out to get you. You'd have to be running all the time. You couldn't stay in one spot. There is an episode later on in Season 1 where that happens to Fangface. He's framed for the crimes committed by a different werewolf. Explicit pressure is being exerted here by the boys with encouragement from the interviewer to exclude girls from identifying with the Heap. It is Alan who had initially seen the Heap as bisexual. He's bisexual, who now insists that girls must not be the Heap. In another group, boys were similarly insistent that girls must not be the Heap. Well, the Heap, it's interesting that these are children viewers commenting on the Heap's long hair as a symbol of his sexual ambiguity, whereas for adult viewers, the fact that the Heap struts around topless and does not have a set of womanly bosoms, I think makes him unequivocally male, and his long hair is more along the lines of, not the Hulk, who actually has short hair, more along the lines of characters like Conan the Barbarian or Tumak, our very masculine hero from the film 1 Million Years BC. Tumak is a handsome caveman. But Christy only renounces the role of the Heap because of the Heap's status as victim. She was happy to be Fangface, though we know that she changes her initial enthusiastic "I'd like" to a more tentative wouldn't mind. 2 other girls nominated Fangface, while 6 opted to be Kim, the girl. In this cartoon, there is really only one female character for girls to identify with. Sally Boyd has too insignificant a role, and when pressed, girls do not accept that role. However, one of the 12-year-old girls did so only with reservations. Kara, I'd be that girl, but I would do more if I was her. Interviewer, would you? What would you do? Kara, I'd find out mysteries, and then all the guys would think you were fantastic. Laughs to girlfriend. Have a note, mimes writing, da-da, imitates fanfare. Not quite sure what that means. The surface form of the cartoon is unfair to girls in that it offers them only one option to identify with as girls. Yeah, that's fair. Whereas boys have a choice of 6 characters and 4 types of character: good and bad monster, middle class, and lower class male. Boys could explicitly identify with more than one of these, and a number of them did so, offering to be, for example, both Fangface and the Heap, or in one case, both the Heap and Biff. Who wants to be Biff? Excluded by the surface form from this exchange of choices, girls have 2 options: to rewrite the possibilities of the girl's role, or to covertly identify with one of the male characters transforming his gender. Both these options have to go against the grain of the cartoon itself, but the cartoon gives both options a point of entry. The Heap does have long hair and bulging pectorals. And Kim is the controller of Fangface. Yes, that is true. It is usually Kim who produces the picture of the sun or moon. She is the intellectual of the group, often shown reading, and in a part of the cartoon that these children did not see, she captures the ray gun to save the day. That is, both these characters have an obvious significance in the cartoon, but there is also the hint of a very different significance, which children aged 9 are quite capable of seeing and making use of, though it remains difficult for them to make it public in a situation like this. Blah, 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 blah. The attraction of the Heap was clearly that he represented unrestrained, forbidden, aggressive impulses. Absolutely. A typical exchange is as follows. Interviewer, why would you like to be the blue man? What would you do? Michael, because I can carry people if something else. Like when my friends try to hurt me and I'm supposed to hurt them, I'll go bash them up. Then I'll get the person and I'll carry him to the hospital. Michael smiles, Len laughs, and falls on back with legs in air. Interviewer, I see. Would that be being good or bad? Children laugh. Michael, good. Children continue to laugh. Interviewer, that would be being good? Was the blue man good? Phyllis, no. Michelle, no. Charmaine, no. Len, no. Michael, yes. Ray, no. Yes. All together. The ambivalent response to the Heap was typical. A number of children saw Fangface as both good and bad too, but the contradictory judgments normally existed at different levels. All these children knew that officially the Heap was to be classified as bad, and they itemized the signs of badness: face, actions, color. As in the present case, claims that the Heap is good and that Fangface is bad were normally accompanied by smiles or laughter and said in a child voice, high energy downwards intonation. The reason Michael gives for wanting to be the Heap is a perfect fusion of contradictory motives: pro-social, carrying people, especially to hospital, and anti-social, putting them in a condition to need to go to the hospital in the first place. The contradictions proliferate in his speech. It is friends, not enemies, who try to hurt him and whom he bashes up. The clause, I'm supposed to hurt him, carries contradictions in a state of fine suspension. The negative, presented as is so swallowed that it's virtually inaudible. Of 5 people who listened to the tape, 2 could not hear it, and the others only heard the slightest trace. So the clause almost comes out as I'm supposed to hurt him, as though hurting friends is a duty imposed on him. But this complex statement is all delivered with a smile, and it's accepted as a joke. Len laughs, and even goes along with it by rolling on his back as though bashed by his friend Michael, the Heap. Michael's discourse is doubly determined by different kinds of meaning, child and parent meanings, in transactional analysis terms, just as the cartoon is. Michael's language, shown by its form as well as its content, that he is easily able to cope with ambiguous messages at 2 levels. In this group interview situation, girls are not so readily permitted to produce such discourse, but occasionally they were able to express the same meanings. Interviewer, and what about the Heap? Why would you like to be the Heap? He was a baddie. Alan, oh, I like being the Heap. All children laugh. Interviewer laughs. What would you do if you woke up one day and you were the heap, and you had to go off to school? What would you do when you got there? Alan, I'd just go, and anyone that teased me, I'd hit him. Smiles. Kara looks at Alan. Scare the teacher. Alan, yeah, scare the teacher out of her wits, and then muck around in the classroom. In this exchange, Alan has a similar fantasy to Michael's without any pretense at virtuous motives. It is legitimate for a boy, and he laughs, as do the girls. When Kara gives her fantasy, legitimated by the authority figure's instructions to fantasize, and under cover of Alan's remarks, no one else smiles. But she is heard, and Alan picks up her comment and extends it. A little later, the discussion had moved on to Fangface. Craig, I like Fangface too, he's good. Interviewer, yes. Is it possible to be good and bad then? Alan, yeah, because, say, you were good at the start, and say someone did something wrong to you, and wanted to get your revenge. Looks down. Interviewer, yes. Kara, and sometimes you can't help being bad. Interviewer, Does that happen to you sometimes, that you can't help being bad? Kara, yes, when I beat up my brother. Boys laugh. Michelle, same here when I beat up my sister. In this exchange, Alan is now speaking as a parent voice. He finishes on a rising inflection, as though asking if he is right. So I guess by parent voice they mean the voice you'd use when speaking to a parent, not speaking as a parent. He looks at the interviewer, then down, not relating to his peers. He is attempting to do justice to the complex moral proposition the interviewer has put to him. Kara's first statement is similarly earnest, with the same markers of parent. Her second statement, however, switches abruptly to child. She smiles, and the boys laugh. Her speech has energy and finishes on a downwards inflection. Although it is rare for her and other girls to express these meanings, when they do so, they have the same form as the boys. In this analysis, we take it that characters like Fangface and the Heap perform the same functions and carry the same meanings for girls as boys, but with a higher level of repression. At a deeper level, both these characters are bisexual or asexual, and both boys and girls seem to recognize the fact. He's bisexual. I'm guessing that in this case they do not mean in terms of sexual attraction, which is almost never comes up on the show, but here and there. I'm sure they mean bisexual in this case simply as coded both male and female depending. Although there was the point earlier about Fangface kissing Pugsy. Again, I would take that more as the kind of affectionate kiss a child would give a sibling and less a romantic kiss, but you could take it that way if you wanted. I can't stop you. The last character to look at is the hero, Fangface/Fangs. His popularity was second to the Heaps among boys, 6 for Fangface against 8 for the Heap, but 3 girls also identified with him, giving him a 9-8 overall victory over the Heap. Fangface was present for a greater amount of time, and children mentioned all his significant features. His single tooth was mentioned by most children, and is indeed the factor that seems to have had the biggest impact on a young John Linnell. I will not explain that reference if you don't get it. It was seen as ridiculous. That's the tooth, not my reference. For example, in one interview there was this exchange. Interviewer, who thought Fangface was like the Incredible Hulk? Sherilyn, with one tooth, laughs, looks at other children who exchange glances with her. Others, yeah. The one tooth was clearly seen as self-evident disqualification from monster status. Fangface was associated with appetite. The episode that children most often laughed out loud at was one where, in response to a food word, Pugsy saying, "Go catch that turkey!"
Go get that turkey! Turkey?
Fangface swallowed Pugsy. This episode was also the one that was most frequently recalled, and Fangface's responsiveness to food and food words in general was normally mentioned. I think this is key to Fangface's character and the fact that he can be both good and bad, and the entire appeal of a heroic monster, because you don't want to soften them too much, is his tendency to eat Pugsy. When I was a kid, I loved Fangface. Didn't care for Fangs. I appreciate Fangs a lot better now, but he was just a cowardly idiot, and now I can appreciate how important he is to the show's dynamic. Most groups mention not only that the sun and moon control his metamorphoses, but that it was done by pictures. One girl specified Kim's role in showing the pictures. In the same interview, one boy speculates that Fangs would not like being transformed. Fangface's hat and the fact that he wore it backwards was mentioned twice by the older children, where it was associated with dumbness. Interviewer, how can you tell the dumb one? Kara, because he's got the hat back to front with he's got a long face. Draws out her face downwards with her hand and pulls a face. By 12, children can certainly read this sign. I'm concerned by the display of physiognomy, I believe is the word, by this child. That's a very problematic pseudoscience. By 12, children can certainly read this sign, but although it was not mentioned by the 9-year-olds, there seems no reason in principle why it should not be part of their response too. Yeah, something you always got to remember when you're talking about children's responses to media is that they cannot always articulate what they are nonetheless definitely observing. In spite of Fangface's exposure, there were some errors of recall. One girl misheard his name as Funnyface, a revealing error. Children in 2 groups refer to him as a dog. Oh, he would be so mad about that.
Dog? I'm a werewolf, not a dog, sir. Dogs do not have a single fang. Dogs whine and bark. I snarl and growl.
What he really is an ignopotamus.
One child said he was brown and white rather than brown, thereby conflating him with Scooby-Doo, who is a brown and white dog? Is he? I thought he was brown and black. Does Scooby-Doo have any white on him? I guess I'll put up a picture in editing so we'll know if I'm wrong or right. But I don't believe I think they're wrong here as well. In our analysis of Fangface, we represented him as a fused figure, a composite transform from Scooby-Doo and the Incredible Hulk. Again, not picking up on Hunt's Hall. And in fact, there's a scene in the Bowery Boys Meet the Monsters that I would argue is the entire genesis of Fangface in a single scene where Hunt's Hall is transformed into a monster and tries to eat Leo Gorcey.
Chief, am I glad to see you. I had the craziest dream. What am I doing with my hands around your neck?
That analysis is confirmed by this tendency of the children to reverse one or other transformation and see Fangface as either monster or dog. The instability of the transform is aided by the inconsistency in Fangface as shown in the figure who might frighten even the Heap, while at other times he is cuddly, greedy, and as cowardly as Scooby-Doo. Skipping ahead again a little bit, different codes, different messages. In our initial analysis of Fangface, it seemed clear that the visual channel was much more significant to the viewer than the verbal channel. We noted that there seemed to be considerable redundancy between the 2 channels, but did not elaborate on the possibility that the kind of content carried by verbal and visual codes might be importantly different. Semiotically, that aspect is crucial, so in our empirical work, we attempted to explore the possibility in a number of different ways. First, we showed modified versions of the first 5 minutes of Fangface. One group saw the program with the soundtrack removed. Another group heard a sound-only version of the same length with a verbal summary of the visual track. We could then compare their responses with those of the children who had seen and heard the full version. The children who saw the visual-only version had a reasonable grasp of what was going on. They knew that the Heap was the villain, that Fangface was a wolf. Some of the other groups called him a dog, even though they had heard him described as a werewolf. They noted that it was a picture or photo of the sun or moon which triggered the metamorphosis. While watching, they were more intent than the other group, but when it finished they relaxed and laughed and said they found it funny. Their description of characters and their clothes was more precise than any other group's. As with all other groups, Kim's clothes were more fully described, mainly by girls, than anyone else's. But no other groups mentioned the detail of the orange ribbon Kim wore. They got Biff's hair color right, and also the color of his clothes, a feat of recall attempted by no one else. The one mistake was that he was attributed with an orange hat, whereas it was Fangs who wore an orange hat, and that back to front. However, their generative grasp of the plot was impaired. The visual track did not contain references to the other professor. The phrase unauthorized experiments was repeated by a number of the children who had heard the soundtrack as the most significant clue to the identity of the Heap. All that the children who did not hear the soundtrack could guess was that the police would come and that the Heap would be killed. One child also misread the significance of Pugsy and described him as a robber because Fangface ate him, though the rest of the group were quite clear about what was happening. In general, the grasp of individual incidents, including use of visual cues as to who was good and who was bad, was equivalent to that of the other groups, and the recall was more precise, but the capacity to see relationships and to project larger patterns was much poorer. On analyzing the cartoon, it becomes clear that it is primarily the verbal code which carried the necessary clues for understanding the plot as a whole. These children's failure is not due to chance. The visual code works more efficiently through paratactic synchronic syntagms in juxtaposition within a frame, e.g. Fangface with his one tooth, and diachronic syntagms, which are short in scope, e.g. Fangface seeing a picture and metamorphosing. In the case of Fangface, the crucial plot information was carried not merely by verbal language, but by an H form of it. I'm not sure what an H form is. One group, which did not predict that the heap was Professor Arnos, also claimed to find Boyd's speech boring. Interviewer, were there any bits that weren't funny? Sasha, yeah, when they talked about the man. Interviewer, which man? Manuela, the professor. Manuela and two others look at interviewer, others look away. Interviewer, Sasha, it was boring. Two children look at interviewer, others look away or play with carpet. These children did not initially remember the names of Fangface or the heap. Sasha's prediction for the end was, Sasha, Fangface would have did something really silly and they would have caught the monster somehow because... Interviewer, yes, Sasha, that's how they all cartoons end. Sasha also endorsed the heap's anti-intellectual bias. Immediately after his comment that it was boring, there was the following exchange. Sherilyn, it's not funny because of the professors, because they make their machines and they get destroyed. Sasha, ooh, poor little machines, smiles. Needless to say, Sasha said he would like to be the heap. I'm the blue person. We can see here the skewed interpretation that arises from an orientation to pictures rather than words, and to L forms of verbal language rather than H forms. So I guess H forms are meanings constructed by the visuals, and L is by the dialogue, I would guess? I don't know. The heap, who does not speak but just roars and is violent to professors and machines, is maximally comprehensible to the visually oriented, and he also represents that tendency as an ideal type of the non-verbal hero. We did not give children the soundtrack on its own. It was so sparse as to be incomprehensible even to us, so we supplemented the sound effects with a voiceover narration to see how a group of children went in decoding a purely sound version of a segment of the same length. Still working with the first 5 minutes, one surprising result was these children had a poorer grasp of the names than children who saw the full version plus sound vision. The interviewer began with a general question. Interviewer, now, what did you think that was all about? Marcus, Fangface, this heat man's obviously orange, and he keeps on stealing the professors, because Andrew, breaking in, I reckon Marcus, someone doesn't want them, and this other person probably wants to make that invention. Marcus gets Fangface's name correct, but he mishears the heap, and then uses his mishearing to recreate a visual image. What is significant is that he needed to project some image, even though it was only a guess. In this interview, Sherman Fangsworth was referred to as Shybro and Pugsy as Gobbo, or whatever his name was. Shybro and Gobbo. It's canon now. But this first comment contrasts markedly with those of all the other groups in that it addresses itself directly to the plot as a whole. Verbal language is oriented to wholes rather than parts. Andrew's intervention, which he came out with as soon as Marcus led him, was an accurate plot prediction before the interviewer had asked for one. I reckon that bloke, the one who's unauthorized, said very indistinctly, he must have conjured it up or something. Again, the word unauthorized acts as a cue for successful plot prediction. The children in this group had a good grasp of the sequence and structure of the story, but they had very idiosyncratic versions of particular episodes. They were clearly affected by a strong need to visualize the story, and these visualizations introduced meanings that were not in the original. The children did drawings after the discussion, and these dramatically showed the extent of the skew. Marcus's Fangface, for instance, was a dog with big ears and 2 teeth. His heap was indeterminate in outline and shape. Leanne, one of the girls, had a very cuddly, long-eared animal as Fangface, under the heading Fangface a Werewolf. The children depended on visual images to concretize a narrative, but these images were uncontrolled by verbal language. So whereas verbal language and visual images work together to key each other so that in spite of the amount of redundancy, each limits the scope of the other, either on its own seems to generate a chaotic plethora of meanings. Another modification to the cartoon that we introduced was to affix a warning notice saying adults only, parental guidance recommended, before showing the first 5 minutes to two groups, a total of 10 children aged 8 to 9. Oh yeah, Fangface, adults only. All the swearing and nudity and... Don't look up Fangface Rule 34. You may not like what you find. And if you do like it, I don't want you watching my videos. The notice is in fact a conflation of two of the codes broadcast on programs in Australia, AO or PGR. The children's reactions while viewing were the same as those of other groups, mainly deadpan expressions with some smiles at a few incidents, and general relaxation and smiles when the film was stopped. The global judgments also were the same, good, said with smiles, and funny. The kids have good taste. It was as though the notice did not exist. But when the interviewer specifically asked, both groups could recall it, and both asked why it was there. In the whole series of interviews, these were the only two questions that were asked of the interviewer, which is a significant comment both on the interviewing situation and on the questions. One group insisted that the words should not have been there. That group was also opposed to censorship in all forms. The other group, however, agreed that censorship was sometimes necessary. Initially, 4 of the 5 children said that Fangface did not deserve an AO, adults only, notice. But the interview went on as follows. Interviewer, why did you think they should have put AO on the cartoon? Marnie, because, if, say, a 2-year-old was watching it and they might have got a bit scared when Fangface was changing. Angela, when he swallows Pugsy, smiles. Interviewer, Richard, or when they hear the ow ow imitates howl, like that, and they go out for a camp and they hear it, they get a little bit scared. Interviewer, so what were the things about that Fangface bit that you thought were really scary, that might scare somebody? Angela, the thing when where that big monster outline shape with her hand came in to come and get him, that was a bit scary. Marnie, yeah, others nod. Angela, in the dark too. Interviewer, why was it scary, that bit? Richard, didn't scare me, but The warning notice on its own was apparently unable to affect their initial perceptions of Fangface, but as supplemented by the coercion of the interviewer, it could begin to turn a funny cartoon into a horror movie. Even after further discussion, the children had not necessarily changed what they thought of the cartoon, but they changed what they afterwards said about it in this situation, producing an alternative reading which coexisted with but did not supplant the initial reading. The progression of Angela's statements is interesting. Initially, she said that Fangface should not be AO. Then she gave a counter instance of it being frightening when he swallows Pugsy, said with a smile to signal that she knew it was really funny, not scary. Finally, she gave an instance that might be scary enough to justify censorship. By this stage, there was a majority in favor of censorship. That became a view legitimated by verbal discourse as an official position, even though it was an unjustifiable judgment. The point is that language did not determine what they perceived initially, but cumulatively it determined what they said, and therefore what they will be judged to have thought by researchers, by teachers and parents, perhaps later even by themselves. Yeah, children are extremely, people forget this, children are extremely self-censoring. Children are extremely susceptible to groupthink and peer pressure and stuff like that from each other as well as from adults, because they want to be good kids. They want to be pro-social. I think, if I may go on a bit of a tangent here, children are a lot more perceptive about what is expected of them than we realize, and that's why they go so all in on gender roles and the heaps not for girls, because they are acutely aware of these things, especially, this book was written a while ago. All the children involved in this are older than I am now, so gender roles, we've gotten a lot more egalitarian on that front in recent years, but children will become very aware of all these gender roles, and people will point to them and say, see, it's natural. Boys want to play with trucks, girls want to play with dolls. But I think they are picking up on the fact that they know they are supposed to play with gendered toys. And parents who are less expecting of this kind of gender conformity are probably going to have kids who are not entirely uninvested in this, but a lot less invested in this, a lot less concerned about what is and isn't appropriate for them. I think kids are very much aware of the idea that something could not be for them. And that's why you get kids who will refuse to watch anything scary or with swear words in it because they feel it's inappropriate for them, and they are kind of self-policing, monitoring their own media consumption. They would not put it in those terms, but in order to counteract the bias of the verbal, we tried another way for children to communicate their interpretation of Fangface. We showed the full cartoon to another group of 14 children, 7 boys and 7 girls, and asked them to draw something in response to it. We related these drawings to the cartoon, not as direct recall accounts, but as transformations of it. Transformations that might delete aspects of it or fuse it with other meanings. Thus, drawings were taken to be important clues to this set of transformational processes, rather than a record of the contents of a child's visual perception or visual memory of the cartoon. To illustrate what we mean by this, we must return to basics for a moment. A cartoon consists of moving pictures, which is to say it is primarily a structure of diachronic syntagms with auxiliary synchronic syntagms. A drawing, however, is a synchronic syntagm. Children of this age took about, skipping ahead over a little bit more academic jargon, children of this age took about 5 minutes to do a single drawing. A single drawing has to transform a very complex set of diachronic syntagms into a single synchronic one. Plot disappears. It cannot easily be represented in a drawing because it is not a synchronic visual category. In practice, of 17 drawings, 9 consisted of a single character, usually facing the viewer, which we took to indicate that the preferred form in which all the actual and potential meanings of the cartoon are transformationally realized in a single character. In 4 pictures, the characters were shown interacting, so we can also see that a particular episode can be used as a transformational equivalent of the show, but it is not the preferred form. The remaining 5 drawings showed no characters but settings, the gang's car or the Heap's mountain retreat being the favored ones. Yeah, the Heap's mountain retreat always left a big impact on me as a kid, and to this day, and it's not just the result of this episode, there's also a bit of the Ewok movie and a lot of the animated version of The Hobbit, but the idea of a mountain retreat, not as a cabin in the mountains, but a cavernous lair built into the mountain. Certain Spaceman Spiff comics have also impacted that, but this is always an idea that has stuck with me, this cavernous lair. The characters chosen to carry the meaning in this form were all predominantly the monsters, Fangface and the Heap. In all, a total of 17 characters were drawn, and 12 of these were monsters, 8 of the Heap and 4 of Fangface. By that count, the Heap emerges as the most potent carrier of meaning for the cartoon, even though he was not seen very often. The pictures of the Heap were all in blue, and all children drew his trousers carefully, with all but one showing his hair long and giving him a feminine appearance. The exception was a picture which put Professor Arnos' bald head on a Heap body. 4 of the drawings of the Heap also showed him with the ray gun in his hand. The Heap, we can see, is more frequently represented with distinctive features, blue long hair carrying a ray gun, than through characteristic actions. Fangface was always colored brown, and in 3 out of 4 drawings had his single tooth prominent. Illustration 3. Ooh, yeah, they're included here, and I'll show them in a second. No one drew his hat, and no one drew him eating. In addition to monsters, the children drew pictures of settings without any characters. So here's these drawings by Francine, who I guess is 5, and Michelle at 7. I guess this is Arnos' head on the Heap's body, and that'll be Kim. Here's the Heap picking up somebody who isn't wearing a shirt, which... No, that's Fangface, because he's got the fang picking up the Heap. That does happen in the episode. And I guess that's the Heap with the ray gun. In addition to monsters, the children drew pictures of settings without any characters. In the full cartoon, there were three main settings: the house, inside and out, the university, laboratory and grounds, and the Heap's cave, which was a laboratory concealed by elaborate mechanical means inside a mountain, rad as hell. This third setting carried in most explicit form the contradiction between nature and culture. It was also the most favored setting for children to draw, 4 drawings, as many as of Fangface. All the drawings of it showed both the rugged mountain with the door, though in the cartoon the door was a concealed one. Barely. It's concealed in the way that doors are in cartoons, where it's clearly a cell and everything else is a painting. Even as a kid, I picked up on that. I was like, I noticed that it looked different from the things that don't move. One boy glossed his drawing as follows: that's the cave, and the door is half open. There's the black, that's how dark it is, and that's the handle you pull up. And this is the grooves, and there's the scallops, the crags on the mountain, and you sort of crawl in and have a cubby. The gloss shows how efficiently a drawing of a setting can encode a cluster of significant features, in this case, nature and culture, inner and outer, danger and security, through the darkness of the cubby. We asked all the children to describe their drawings, and we classified both the drawings and descriptions into 2 groups, predominantly transactive and predominantly non-transactive. See Kress and Hodge, 1979, for this distinction, which is discussed at greater length in Chapter 3, which I don't think I'm going to read here. In English sentences, a transactive has a real object, acted on by the agent, e.g. he hit it. A non-transactive has no definitive object, e.g. he ran. Okay, yeah, I get this distinction. I wish Mad Libs made this distinction. It would make the game a lot more fun. And in my family, we always had kind of a house rule that you would say whether it had an object, when you came to a verb, you'd say whether it had an object or not. The transactive drawings were ones which showed a character doing something to something or someone else, like hitting it or carrying him. The non-transactive drawings showed a character just doing something, like running or flying. This classification revealed one major difference. Whereas most of the drawings were static, non-transactive forms, most of the descriptions emphasized action. In fact, of the 17 pictures, 14 were non-transactive and only 3 were transactive, showing characters acting on something else. Of the descriptions, there were only 4 non-transactives and 11 transactives. A picture showing a single individual would be glossed as an incident. That the monster is pushing in the door. He banged the door down and he carried the professor back when he was laughing at the professor in the cage. Neither the actions nor the objects of the actions are shown in the drawing, so the difference between the 2 codes can be seen clearly from this example. The visual code filters out actions and the flow of time, preferring to focus on a collection of features outside of time. Insofar as it generalizes, it does so in different ways by showing representative features juxtaposed. In contrast, the verbal code handles episodes, diachronic syntagms. I'm still not quite sure what that means, far more easily, and it can reorder these with effortless facility, as for example in the flow of the one sentence, the monster bangs the door down, carries the professor away, and laughs at him in the cage. Because it is ordered in time, verbal language moves effortlessly through it. Visual language, being ordered in space, resists the flow of time. Thus, visual language finds it difficult to represent episodes, while for a single picture it is impossible to represent an abstract plot. Okay, yeah, I think I understand what he's saying here. That is pretty much the extent of the content in here about Fangface. It comes up a little bit more here and there where they're talking about gender imbalance in children's media, the fact that Kim, why come only one girl? But most of that seems to be talking about the Muppets, with Fangface only used as a brief kind of throwaway other example of that. So that's all I'm going to read from here. But I just think it's super cool that Fangface was used in a serious academic study. And yeah, I think that, as I said earlier, any piece of media is worthy of this kind of study. We have this idea that only the super intelligent, deep works of art like Hamlet are worthy of analysis, which is nonsense. I think we absolutely need to take intellectual looks at any piece of media, including the ostensibly low art forms and populist stuff and Marvel movies and all that stuff, all of it is worthy of analysis and interpretation. So please, in the comments, please don't do that whole "I can't believe how much they're overthinking it" anti-intellectual bullshit. It's not funny, it's not cute.
Boy, that's enough to make you want to stay away from college.
Your brains are enough to keep you away.
But again, I want to encourage everybody to check out Fangface. It's a delightful show. All the episodes are now available for purchase online legally. I'll put links in the description to them, especially if you've got a kid who likes monster stuff but isn't ready for, you know, the really scary, actually scary stuff. I think Fangface is a great entry point for that. What I will be doing in the new year is finishing up my Inner Life. I've got to remake 30 H's because, alas, that's gone. The original, that's just gone. I don't have the files to that, but I can't not have 30 H's. I've got to do that again. I'll hold my nose at all the Harry Potter bullshit in there. That's all right. It has almost nothing to do with Harry Potter. And more pulp readings. I would like to do a whole series on Richard Sharp Shaver, who was a very prolific pulp sci-fi writer, although he would not call himself that because he was insistent that none of this was fiction. So I'm looking forward to really delving into his utterly batshit worldview. It's going to be a lot of fun. In the meantime, let's hope 2023 is a good year. Let's hope I don't get suspended again. Also, if you're not watching, I will say this though, you're missing out on some of the best stuff. We just did a video over there ranking all 9 of Santa Claus's reindeer. I don't think anyone could possibly disagree with our excellent taste, so check that out too. Thank you to all of my amazing Patreon supporters, especially Xana Zira, Michael Fattori, and Break System BSC. Without you guys, not just you three, but all of my Patreon supporters and all of the kind commenters, I probably would not have restarted the new channel. I would have decided it wasn't worth it, but I could see that people were really enjoying this, and I like making these videos, so thank you all for being here, and thanks for being you.